I'm a locksmith. I can open just about any door in this town. And there came a season of my life when I held in my hand the one key that could have burned 3 whole families to the ground. I'm going to tell you why I set it down. It started with a key that didn't fit anything. A little brass house key I found in the pocket of my wife's winter coat when I went looking for my truck keys one cold morning. To anybody else, it's a key. To me, it's my whole trade. And a key that doesn't open anything in your own life is the same as a footprint in a house where nobody's supposed to have walked. I knew every lock in our world. Our doors, my shop, her car, the cabin, her mother's place. That key opened none of them. And I stood in my own kitchen, in the grey morning light, turning a piece of brass over in my fingers. And some quiet part of me already knew that I was holding the beginning of the end of my marriage. Stay with me, because this one doesn't go the way you'd think. And the reason I'm telling it is the part most men never hear. By the end, I had every right and every means to ruin the man my wife had chosen. A man this whole town worshipped, and to humiliate her in front of every soul we knew. I could have done it with one sentence. And I want to walk you through exactly why the strongest thing I ever did was the thing I chose not to do. Where are you listening from tonight? Tell me, because I like knowing who's out there. And stay to the end, because the lesson at the bottom of this is the one I'd hand my own son. My name is Russ. I'm 48 years old, and I've been a locksmith in a small town in southern Minnesota for going on 25 years. I own the shop. My name's on the sign, and there isn't a lock, a safe, a deadbolt, or an ignition in 3 counties I can't get into if you give me time and a reason. I was married to Wendy for 19 years. We have 2 kids, a boy named Owen, who's 16 and plays on the high school football team, and a girl named Hannah, who's 10. I'm going to tell you how a man who opens locks for a living found the one door in his life he was never meant to open, and what was on the other side of it, and why I shut it again with my own hand. Let me tell you about the trust first, because you can't understand the choice I made at the end without understanding what I'd built and what I stood to lose. I was a provider, and I was proud of it in the plain way my father raised me to be. A locksmith doesn't keep regular hours. When somebody's locked out of their house at 11 at night in a Minnesota January with a baby inside and the car running, they don't wait until morning, and neither do I. When a business gets broken into, I'm there before the sun to make it safe again. When somebody's husband dies and the family can't get into his gun safe or his old desk, I'm the one they call. And I do that work gentle, because there's grief on the other side of a lot of locks. I left at all hours. I came home at all hours. My truck out at strange times was the most normal thing in the world in our house, and I never once thought about how a schedule like mine is the easiest schedule in the world for somebody to hide inside of. Wendy and I built a good life from very little. We started in a rented place with a leak in the roof and a baby on the way. Me running other people's service calls and dreaming about my own shop. She worked the front desk at a couple of places over the years, and the last few she'd been at the school district office. We made the shop happen together. We raised Owen, and then Hannah, in a little blue house I re-keyed myself the day we bought it. Because a locksmith's family sleeps behind locks only he holds the key to. That was a point of pride with me. I thought we were solid. I thought after 19 years and 2 kids and a business built with 4 hands, we were the kind of solid that doesn't come apart. I want you to understand what kind of man I was in that marriage, because it makes the rest hurt worse, and it makes the choice at the end mean more. I was the dependable one. The town knew it before my own wife took it for granted. People hand a locksmith the keys to everything they own. Their homes, their stores, the safe where they keep the deed, and the pistol, and the wedding ring of a mother who's passed. And they do that because they've decided he's a man who won't betray a trust. I'd built a whole reputation, over 25 years, on being exactly that. The quiet fellow you can leave alone in your house with your valuables, and come back to find nothing touched but the lock you hired him to fix. I carried that into my marriage too. I figured a man that careful with everybody else's trust had earned a wife who'd be careful with his. I learned the hard way that the trust you give freely at home is the one nobody audits. And the one nobody audits is the easiest one in the world to spend behind your back. I'll tell you about a warning I waved off a few years back. Because it's the same blind spot I see in good men over and over. There'd been a stretch where Wendy got close with a man from one of her jobs, texting more than seemed right, going quiet when I came in the room. And I'd asked her about it once. Careful. And she'd been hurt and offended that I'd think such a thing after all our years. And I felt ashamed, and I let it go. I patched it over. And a man in my trade ought to know better than anybody that a lock you've had trouble with once will give you trouble again. That the weakness doesn't fix itself just because you stopped paying attention to it. I knew that about hardware. I refused to know it about my own marriage. Now, you have to understand our town to understand the rest of this. We are a Friday night football town. In a place like ours, where the winters are long and there's not a lot to do, the high school team is the beating heart of the whole community. And the man who runs that team is something close to royalty. Our coach, a fellow named Rick Brandt, was exactly that kind of royalty. Athletic director, head football coach, been here 20 years, won a couple of section titles, the kind of man who gets stood up and applauded at the supper club, whose name is on a banner in the gym, who shakes every hand in the room like he's running for office, which, in a town like ours, a coach more or less is. Everybody loved Coach Brandt. My own son loved Coach Brandt. Owen would run through a wall for that man. Hold on to that, because it's the whole weight of what came later. So I had this key, a brass house key, a common enough blank, but I'm a locksmith, and a key is a sentence I can read. I could see from the keyway and the cuts what kind of lock it fit, a residential deadbolt, a particular common brand. And I could see it was freshly cut, the brass still bright on the edges, not worn smooth like a key that's been riding in a pocket for years. A new key to a door I'd never heard of, in my wife's coat. I didn't say anything. I put it back exactly where I found it, turned the same way. Because the first rule of my trade is, you don't let the lock know you've been studying it. And once I was looking, the rest of it was right there. The way it always is, every piece with a clean little answer sitting next to it. There were the Booster Club nights. Wendy had gotten real involved with the football program that fall. The Booster Club, the fundraisers, the team dinners, and there were 2 or 3 evenings a week she was out for it. And I thought, good, she's into Owen's season. That's a fine thing for a mother to be. There was a phone that lived face down now with a passcode where there'd never been one. And she said it was because Hannah kept getting into her games. There was money, small amounts, gone in ways I didn't track. And she said the Booster Club was always needing cash for this and that. There was a brightness to her on the nights she went out. A care she took with how she looked that I told myself was just a woman feeling good about being part of something. She'd come home from those booster nights lit up and a little far away, and she'd be tender with me in a careful sort of way for a day after. The way a person is gentle with something they've already decided to set down. There was a perfume I didn't recognize, and a new way she had of leaving the room to take a call. I had an answer for all of it. I had a key in my hand that opened a door I couldn't name, and I was still telling myself the house was secure. That's the thing nobody warns you about trust. It isn't that you can't see the signs, it's that you've handed someone the master key to your own good sense, and they can walk you right past the evidence in your own home. I want you to remember the Booster Club, by the way, those weeknight team dinners. Because the thing my wife was hiding wasn't hiding very far from the thing my whole town was cheering for on Friday nights. And when I finally saw it whole, it took the wind clean out of me. I'm a patient man. My whole trade is patience. You don't force a lock. You feel it. You let it tell you what it wants. You set one pin at a time until the whole thing turns. So I didn't tear into anything. Over a couple of weeks, I just paid attention. The way I pay attention to a stubborn cylinder. I noticed the booster nights lined up with the nights the brass key would have been useful. I noticed a particular truck, a coach's truck, everybody in town knew on sight, parked one evening on a side street, near a row of rental units across from where Wendy said the team dinner was. I did the thing my trade taught me to do, with a key I don't recognize. I read it. I sat at my workbench one night after everybody was asleep, and I put that little brass key under the light, and I studied it like I'd study a key a customer brought me off a ring, with no idea what it opened. The blank told me the manufacturer. The keyway told me the lock body. The cuts, the depths, the spacing told me it was a residential deadbolt, mid-grade, the kind a landlord puts on a rental unit a dozen at a time. And the brightness of the brass told me it had been cut inside the last few months, which meant it was new, which meant whatever door it opened was a door that had come into my wife's life recently and on purpose. I've cut 10,000 keys. I know what a fresh secret looks like in brass. I put it back on her ring that night, turned exactly the way she'd left it. Because the second rule of my trade, right after patience, is that you never let the lock know how close you are. And one cold night, when she'd gone out and left her keys on the hook, the way you do in a house where you trust each other, I took that brass key off her ring, and I drove to that row of rentals. And I didn't break in, I didn't do anything ugly. I just walked the row in the dark and I tried that key in one door, gentle, the way I do everything. And it turned. It was a little rented apartment, dark, nobody home that minute, and I didn't go in. Because going in wasn't the point, and wasn't legal, and wasn't me. I just needed to know the key opened a door I'd never been told about. And it did. And on the way back to my truck, I saw the mail slot had a name taped over it in the cheap way landlords do. And the name was an initial and a last name, and the last name was Brandt. Rick Brandt. The coach. The man my son would run through a wall for. My wife had a key to a second apartment that the most beloved man in our town was keeping on a quiet street. And the two of them had built a whole little world there on booster club nights while I was out making other people's houses safe. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I felt. Standing in that dark parking lot with a brass key in my fist was something quieter and flatter than rage. It was the feeling I get when I finally understand a lock that's been beating me. That flat, quiet click in the chest where the mystery turns into a fact. My marriage was over. I knew it the way I know a cylinder's about to give, and right behind that fact came a second one. And this is the one this whole story is really about. I realized, standing there, that I now held the single most dangerous key in the entire county. Not the brass one, the knowledge. I knew a secret that could end Rick Brandt's career, end his marriage, take him down off every banner in that gym, and turn my wife into the woman the whole town whispered about for the rest of her life. And people would believe me. I'm the quiet locksmith everybody trusts with the keys to their homes and their businesses and their dead father's safes. If I said it, it would be true to this town the second it left my mouth. I drove home that night, holding more power than I'd ever held in my life, and it scared me more than the betrayal did. I did not confront her. I want you to hear that, because everything good that came after depended on it. I went home, and I put the brass key back on her ring turned the right way, and the next morning I called a lawyer. Because the man who keeps his head is the man who keeps his life. And I needed to know exactly where I stood before I did one single thing. The lawyer was a steady woman named Carol, who'd done family law in our part of Minnesota for a long time. And she told me some things I didn't want to hear, and one thing that turned out to matter more than any of them. Minnesota, she said, is a no-fault state. And she watched my face when she said it, because she'd seen this look on a lot of men, It means, she said, that it does not legally matter that she cheated. The court will not punish her for the affair. It won't change the division of property. It won't get you out of anything. It won't move alimony. The judge will divide what's marital fairly and equitably. And the fact that your wife has a key to another man's apartment will not earn you $1 extra or 1 extra day with your kids. I sat there and felt something hot come up in me, because I'd been raised to believe that the truth, once you had it cold, was supposed to count for something. And here was the law telling me that the worst thing she'd done was the one thing that wouldn't matter at all. The shop, Carol said, that I could protect. I'd started it before I ever married Wendy and kept it mine. And as long as I'd kept its money its own, it stayed mine. The marital property we'd divide fair. The kids, she said. The kids would come down to what was best for them. And on that score, I had a strong case just by being the steady, present father I'd always been. The booster club notwithstanding. So I'd keep my shop, get a fair share, and have a real shot at being the kids' primary home. That was the win available to me. And it was a fair one. And it was nowhere near as satisfying as the other thing I was holding. Carol gave me the same rules every good lawyer gives a wronged man, and they were the rules I already lived by at work. Don't confront her in a rage. You'll only make yourself look unstable. Don't move out of the house. Don't touch the joint money. Don't do anything clever. A judge can smell a man trying to punish his wife from across the courtroom, and it always backfires on him. Document what you need for the kids' sake, quietly, and let the law do its slow, fair, unsatisfying work. And then she looked at me over her glasses, and she said one more thing. Because she'd been doing this a long time, and she could see what was sitting on my chest. She said, "And whatever you think you know about that other man, whoever he is, you let that be. Anonymous letters, phone calls, telling the town. It feels like justice, and it is poison. It makes you the villain in your own divorce. Men ruin themselves trying to ruin the other fellow." I told her I understood. I didn't tell her that the other fellow was the most beloved man in town, and that I could end him with a sentence, because I was still, that day, telling myself I wasn't the kind of man who would. Because here's what I sat with for the next few weeks. And I'll be honest with you about how close it came. The law wasn't going to punish Wendy or Rick Brandt at all. But I could. I had the key. All I had to do was talk. One word at the supper club. One quiet conversation with the wrong right person, and it would be all over town by Friday. I could stand up at a booster meeting. I could make sure Rick Brandt's wife knew, who'd done nothing to me and deserved the truth. But I could do it in a way that lit the whole thing on fire. The law had taken the justice off the table, and there was a voice in me, a loud one, that said, "Then take it yourself. You have the means. You have the standing. Make them pay since the court won't." For a couple of weeks, that voice was the loudest thing in my head. And I am not too proud to tell you I drafted the words in my mind 100 times. Who I'd say them to, how fast they'd travel, exactly which doors they'd kick open. I have to tell you about the night it nearly won, because I think any man who's been wronged will feel it in his gut. It was a Friday, a home game. I was in the stands because my son was on that field, and Owen had a good game. And after it, the coach gathered the boys at midfield like he always did, and the crowd cheered. And Rick Brandt stood there in the lights with his arm around my son's shoulder pads, telling those boys about character, about being the kind of men this town could be proud of. Character. My wife's apartment key was burning a hole in my mind, and that man stood under the lights with his hand on my boy, talking about character. And the hypocrisy of it nearly stood me straight up out of my seat. I could have said it right there, in front of everybody, in the worst and most public way a thing can be said. I felt the words come up into my throat. I had the key. I could open that door in front of the whole town and watch it all come down. I want you to sit in that moment with me, because I think it's where most men lose themselves. And I came as close as a man can come. I had the whole picture in my head, vivid as a photograph. The gasp, the faces turning, Rick Brandt's smile dropping off his face under those lights, Wendy somewhere in those bleachers feeling the whole world find out at once. For about 3 seconds, it felt like the only justice left in the world, the only thing that would make the scale balance. And everything in my chest leaned toward it, like a door swinging open on a strong spring. There is a kind of power that feels exactly like being right, and it is the most dangerous feeling a wronged man can have, because it will walk him straight off a cliff and call it standing up for himself. And then I looked at Owen, my son, 16 years old, helmet under his arm, looking up at that coach he loved with his whole heart, proud of the game he'd played, proud to be on that field. And I understood, in one clean turn of the lock, exactly what I'd be doing if I opened that door. I wouldn't just be ending Rick Brandt, I'd be ending my son's season, his team, the thing that got that boy out of bed in the morning. I'd be making Owen, for the rest of his life, the kid whose dad blew up the coach, whose mother was the scandal, the boy at the center of the worst thing that ever happened in this town. I'd be doing it to Rick Brandt's own kids, who'd done nothing, who'd have to walk those same high school halls. I'd be lighting a fire I couldn't aim, that would burn the innocent worse than the guilty. The justice I wanted would land on every wrong person first. I sat back down. I didn't say a word. And on the drive home that night, with Owen beside me still buzzing about the game, I made the hardest decision of my whole life, which was to hold the most powerful key I'd ever held and never, ever turn it. I remember that drive better than almost anything in my life. My boy was lit up the way a 16-year-old gets after a good Friday night. Helmet paint still on his hands, talking a mile a minute about a block he'd thrown, a play they'd run, what the coach had said to him on the sideline. He kept saying, "Coach this and coach that," this man he admired, and every time he said it, it was a small knife. Because I knew what I knew and he didn't, and I had it in my power to take all of this away from him before we even got home. And I looked over at my son in the dashboard light, happier than I'd seen him in months, whole and proud and 16. And I understood that being his father meant carrying things he could never know I carried. That's the part of being a man nobody tells you about when you're young. It isn't the storms you walk into. It's the storms you swallow whole and walk through smiling so your kids never feel the wind. I drove my boy home that night with the worst secret in town in my chest. And I laughed at his stories. And I meant the laugh. Because he'd earned a father who could be happy for him even on the worst night of that father's life. That drive was the moment I became the man I'm prouder of than any other version of me. Not because I was strong enough to bring the house down, because I was strong enough not to. Here's what I did instead. The quiet way. The way that let me keep being a man my kids could look at. I told Wendy I knew, not in a rage, not with the whole town watching. I waited until the kids were at her mother's one evening, and I set that brass key on the table between us. And I watched the color leave her face. And I told her, plain, that I knew whose door it opened, and that I knew everything, and that our marriage was over. I told her I would not be telling the town. I told her I would not be the one to burn Rick Brandt down. Not because either of them deserved my mercy, but because my son did, and his kids did. And I was not going to set my own boy on fire to get back at the two of them. I told her we were going to divorce, quietly and fairly, and that she could tell people whatever story let her sleep, and that the truth would find its own way out into the world, in its own time, without my hand on it. And then I went and slept in the spare room. And that was the most powerful I have ever felt in my life. And I never raised my voice once. We divorced the quiet way. I kept my shop free and clear. We split the marital things fair, the way Carol said we would, and I didn't try to take $1 more than was right. Because taking more would have been me turning the key, after all, just in a different lock. The kids landed primarily with me, because when it came down to who'd been the steady one, the present one, the answer was plain to everybody, including the judge. Owen finished his season. He had a good year. He never knew, not then, why his parents split, just that they did, the way a lot of kids' parents do. And he got to keep his team and his coach, and the clean memory of the best year of football in his young life. And that, to me, was worth more than any revenge the law had taken off my table. People in town asked, of course, a marriage of 19 years comes apart and folks want a reason. And there were plenty of nights I could have handed them the real one and watched their faces. Wendy's own family asked me, point blank, what happened? And I told them what I told everybody, that some marriages just run their course and ours had, and that I wished her well. I let her keep her dignity in front of the town she still had to live in, not because she'd earned it, but because tearing it off her would have splashed back on my kids, and because I'd decided I'd rather be a man with a secret than a man with a vengeance. It is a strange thing to protect the reputation of the person who broke your heart. But I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting the kind of man my children were going to grow up believing their father was. And that man does not drag people into the street, even people who dragged him. And here's the part about justice, since I know that's what you came for. I didn't burn it down. But a thing like that, two people meeting in a rented apartment in a small town, it doesn't stay secret forever on its own. Small towns have eyes I don't control. About a year after my divorce was final, it came out, the way these things do, through some other crack, in some other way that had nothing to do with me. And when it did, and Rick Brandt's life came apart, and the banners felt different in that gym, not one person could say the locksmith did it out of spite, because the locksmith had been divorced and quiet and decent for a year by then. The truth got out on its own legs. It always does. I just didn't have to be the one who dragged it into the street. And because I wasn't, my son got to keep his season, and I got to keep something I'd have lost forever if I'd opened that door in the stands. I got to keep being the man my kids think I am. I won't pretend it didn't cost me. There were nights I sat alone in my shop after closing, surrounded by every kind of lock there is, and grieved 19 years, and a woman I'd trusted with the only keys that ever really mattered. And I had to own my piece of it, because a man always has one. I'd been so proud of being the provider, out at all hours making everybody else's house safe, that I'd quit checking the locks on my own marriage. I left it untended, trusting it the way you trust a deadbolt you installed years ago and never look at again. And a deadbolt you never check is a deadbolt that's already been picked. I didn't make her do what she did. That was hers. But I'd stopped paying attention to my own door a long time before somebody else got a key to it. And I'll tell you, the grief had a strange shape. Because part of what I grieved wasn't even her. It was the picture I'd had of myself. The careful man, the one everybody trusted, who turned out to have been careless about the one thing that mattered most. I spend my life telling customers that the most expensive lock in the world doesn't help you if you leave it unlatched. That security isn't the hardware, it's the habit of checking. And I'd preached that to half the county, while leaving my own front door of a marriage swinging on the hinge for years. There's a humbling in that a man doesn't get over quick. I sat in that shop a lot of nights with a cup of coffee gone cold, learning to forgive the version of me that hadn't paid attention, which it turns out is harder than forgiving the wife who walked out the unlatched door. So here's what a tired locksmith would tell you tonight. For whatever it's worth, there's a thing in my trade called a master key. It opens every door in the building, all of them. The supply closet and the boss's office, and the room where they keep the things nobody's supposed to see. And the first thing you learn when somebody trusts you with a master key is that holding it changes you. Because suddenly there's no door you can't open, and a man finds out real fast what kind of man he is by what he does with that. The weak ones open every door just because they can. The strong ones learn that the whole point of holding a master key is knowing which doors to leave shut. I had the master key to the worst secret in my town. I could have opened it in front of everybody. And the strongest thing I have ever done, stronger than any divorce, stronger than any revenge, was to hold that key in my hand and choose to walk past the door. I think a lot of men get sold a backwards idea of strength. They think it's the swing, the blow, the big, loud square up where everybody sees you stand. And sometimes it is. But the older I get, the more I believe the real strength is the held hand, the swallowed word, the power you have and decide not to spend, because you can see far enough down the road to know who it'd land on. Any man can pull a trigger he's got his finger on. It takes a different kind of man to carry a loaded thing his whole life and never fire it, because firing it would cost the wrong people everything. I carried mine. I still do, in a way. And I have never once been sorry. I've still got my shop. My name's still on the sign. The kids are with me most of the time. And Owen's grown now into a steady young man who still doesn't fully know what his old man carried for him that year. And I hope he never has to. Hannah's 12 and fierce and keeps me honest. The little blue house is quieter than it was, but the locks on it are good ones, and I check them now. All of them. The way I should have all along. Tell me where you're standing when you hear this. And tell me, if you'd held the key I held, could you have walked past that door? I think more of you could than believe you can. It's the hardest lock there is, the one you choose to leave shut. Go home tonight and check the doors on the things you love, while they're still yours to check.